about time and how long it actually takes to do something. And we tend to be rounding in our numbers. We'll have a meeting. Well, how much time will we schedule for a meeting, Larry? An hour, right? It's actually really 10 minutes of stuff we need to talk about, or 9, but we schedule an hour. Things take a lot less time than we think. So there's a big part of leadership behaviors that goes with this and relate to organizational behaviors, leadership development, stuff like that. There's also behaviors that prevent flow, that cause batching of information. So if a boss treats me poorly by blaming me for problems or publicly humiliating me, being condescending, then this is the kind of person that I don't want to talk to. So when a problem comes up, I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to hold the information until I'm absolutely forced to cough it up. And this is how companies end up with big surprises. Kind of, Volkswagen comes to mind in this case. So the bad leadership behaviors severely disrupt information flow, as well as the time function related to that information flow. Stops it. And what you'll find if you look closely is disrespect for people is embedded all over the place. You got to look into policies and metrics and other daily practices and tone of voice, body language. There's a whole host of stuff you gotta go look at, and also reorient yourself away from blaming people as always the source of problems to blaming the process. You had a bad hiring process. You have a bad performance review process. You have a bad process for rotating people around different jobs so they don't become demotivated and the like. This is a human-centered management system. Human beings play a very important role in this management system. It is what, robots cannot do Kaizen. They cannot think of improvement ideas. Only people can. And what too many folks out there have done is they latch on to the continuous improvement tools, and in this analogy, it's like the dry stuff that you need here to bake cookies, and they think that they're going to get brownies, without adding any of the wet stuff. And you need both to make brownies, not just the powder. And most, when you're used to zero-sum thinking for 10, 20, 30 years in business, this never occurs to you. You don't realize how important this is. And so we get a lot of what I call fake lean out there. And again, this is something we need to do as teachers. Teach students there's a difference between real lean and fake lean, or, or some other words if you like, but just that kind of contrast. There is important stuff that not to talk about today, but when these processes are improved such that they operate more reliably with fewer glitches, less quality problems, there's just an overall of a less desire to blame people for mistakes, and it becomes a much healthier work environment, and you have more fun in that work environment. It's just fabulous, and I think, Larry, when we were going around wire mold and doing our book, did you ever see a calmer senior management team in your life? Most of the time these folks are running around like chickens with their head cut off. But these guys were basically teaching people how to recognize and correct their own problems. Conventional management is a very low level of executive skill. I was in a friend's shop in Rhode Island recently, and they had that thing sitting up there for 7 or 8 years in their shop trying to sell it. I saw that going, I want that immediately. It's a dartboard for decision making. It's a joke, but there's truth to it in the real world. As employees, you want this, this kind of boss, whether they're a supervisor on up to the top, or do you want a higher level of executive skill? Another thing I tell my students is don't confuse good grades with or obtaining a degree with knowing anything, especially in the context of Lean. You're never done learning. And you can say that a lot about a lot of things, but this Lean stuff, particularly with this thing here, is elusive. So for people who like to learn and continue to learn, it's fabulous, it's wonderful, etc. For people who like the world to be black and white, on, off, win, lose, they're not going to like it. So to Larry's point, they'll run away from this, and they won't like it. But what I find is a tremendous amount of overconfidence that people have as a result of good grades. So whether it's due to grade inflation or anything else, the reality is when you have things like the Great Recession and so forth, and the kind of lending that was going on there, most of the folks responsible for that stuff, you know, came out of big schools with big diplomas and big grades, and creates an arrogance, it creates complacency, a lack of questioning, a lack of humility, and basically, I'm going to go out in my boat and sail across the Atlantic without any foul weather gear or anything, and I get into trouble. Overconfidence. Why should you teach this at CCSU? This is really part of Connecticut history. In the history of lean management in America, there was a Kawasaki plant in Nebraska that predates lean management arriving here in Connecticut. That Kawasaki plant was 1978 or 1979. The Kaizen consultants out of Toyota showed up here in 1987 at Jake Brake, a unit of Danaher, then Otis Elevator, then Pratt & Whitney. When Shingijutsu consultants had their conference here, or had a conference, their first conference ever was here in Connecticut, because there's a strong connection that the Shingijutsu company and Mr. Nakao has towards Connecticut. Books about Kaizen, Art Burn and Wire Mold, The Lean Turnaround. This is the book that Larry and I co-authored. There's case studies here done by Larry, a former colleague, Martha Franson, Ed Miller, and Steve Maynard of wire mold, case studies for use obviously in the classroom. There's Larry's book he co-authored, Practical Lean Accounting. This is the CFO at Wire Mold. This is a book that features a lot of lean leaders, including the ex-Wire Mold folks. Mark is going to be talking to you in a couple of weeks, and Ed Miller as well. I mean, this is really part of the business history of lean. There is something now called Lean CT, the application of lean in state government. That the governor made an announcement the other day about that, and the release of the 2015 status report of how that's going. I wrote a little critique about that on my blog. There's some room for improvement. But anyway, this is part of the history of Connecticut. I guess lastly here, when students are dealing with problems, do we want them to be, as they make their way through an organization, unskilled in terms of we just do Band-Aids and workarounds? Do we want them to know a higher level of how to improve things, improving a process at a point level, but still higher up, improving a process end-to-end or changing the system ultimately? So I think we want skilled leadership rather than unskilled leadership. We've had enough of that over the decades. So with that, I am happy to take any questions you have. Yes, sir.
Knowing what you know of business education in this country, let's say, how distinctive could we be if we adopted Lean as one of the principles in the MBA program? Do you think that would put us on the map? Is there competition for that kind of recognition?
Yes, but it's not simply, you have to market that, you have to make the benefits of that known in terms of to the students and to the employers as well. So you would have to pull that proposition through the marketplace rather than stand alone. This is what we do at CCSU, and that's why we're better or whatever.
But are you asking, does anybody else do this?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any business school that does this. Is it
well, the Fisher School of Business at Ohio State, but it's mainly an operations focus.
Yeah. And they do have like an executive program that has a couple days of lean stuff, but they, other than that, there's Maharishi University, surprisingly enough, right, that has an emphasis on lean. And but you know, most of it is, you know, engineering and some supply chain. That's where Lean is in education. Very few business
Oakland
schools
University
really
in
taking a shot.
Michigan is doing some stuff. I don't have an inventory of this, and it's always a question. We get the same question in industry. Who else in our industry is doing this? And that can't be your rationale, you know, because if you're looking, not specifically picking on you in your question, but if somebody's looking around for, you know, a benchmark to compare themselves with, well, all that's going to do is cost you time. You might be waiting 5 or 10 years before somebody in your industry is doing it, in which case you might not be around.
So in asking my question, I'm not Lean.
Well, it's just that, you know, like they talk about benchmarking a lot, and Toyota does not benchmark because they say, you know, we're going to focus on perfection is our goal, and we're going to focus on getting better. And we're going to focus on what the customer demands and where we think we have to be for the customer, and what everybody else is doing. First of all, we don't think we can learn a whole lot from them because they're not operating at the level we are in most cases. And so it's a waste of time to go after benchmarking. And
well, they do spend a lot of time on market intelligence, but that's not necessarily benchmarking.
Right, it's knowing the customer.
Yeah, I am knowing your competitors, but not necessarily, it's not the same as benchmarking. Yeah.
I'm in favor instead of a focus on continuous improvement generically and not on Lean. And my reasoning tentatively is as follows. In management, we go through managerial fads, not to deprecate Lean in any way. Mm-hmm. But we've seen a number of them, and they have currency for about a decade, and then management moves on to something else. In fact, when I was in industry, we used to call them flavors of the month. There was something new each year. Lean's been around a while, and I'm wondering whether it's running out of steam.
I am too.
I worked for 2 years at the Lean Aerospace Initiative at MIT, which has since disbanded, for example. It tried to expand beyond military and government into the private sector, and for whatever reason, no longer exists. So I'm concerned that in focusing specifically on Lean, in branding our exercise, we might have staked out a position that will be unhappy with in 3 to 5 years because something else has come up, or there just isn't enough interest in it.
No, it's a very valid point, and and I normally in my teaching refer to this as progressive management, and not Lean management specifically.
Progressive management.
The
But that's
generic.
a label that is somewhat negative. I think.
Strongly normative as well.
Sorry, the word progressive is.
Strongly normative.
Well, you need some way. I mean, you know, basically there is an evolution of this way of thinking of management. You know, starting with Frederick Taylor and Henry Fayol, and even you know, they didn't get their ideas out of nowhere. That came from people. Some ideas came from others before them. So from the mid 1800s. But anyway, this starts to get a foothold in a serious way in you know, the late 1800s, and then, you know, picks up steam in the 1900s and so forth, and gets picked up and evolved and added to, etc. And you know, one thing I wouldn't, you know, worry too much about it is what you call it, because yeah, the names come and go, and you know, some people, I don't like Lean because it reminds you of skinny and nothing there and wasting away, and you know, whatever you call it, somebody's going to criticize it for something or other. But the idea is basically to express that you're learning a different way of managing and leading an organization that makes you more capable for long-term prosperity in good times and in bad.
Yeah. Now just find a word to
Well, so the word, you know, it's kind of interesting. When we look at Taylorism, the thing that always gets left out in the modern interpretation and 90+% of the application was the being decent to people. Taylor said if you gave people the share of the improvement in the productivity,
right,
they'll keep doing this, it'll be good. Right?
Yep.
And you know, back in the 1980s when I was working with Dr. Deming, this is all pure Deming with new tools in there, lots of great new tools. But you know, it was the same thing. You know, you when you get to the treating of people decently, of being willing to say, you know, when we improve things through our synergy, one person or a small handful don't get to claim all of that. That's where it breaks down. And we can name it whatever we want to name it, but I guess my place where I run up against this is sort of the heartbreak of having worked with Deming, and now people don't even know his name, and he was revolutionary in what he wanted us to do, as was Chair, as who the people rebranding this stuff as Lean and adding to it, not just rebranding. I get that there's adding to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolution. It's building off of a lot of
it is.
stuff.
This is a life of things, and for the people who practice it, it's a life-changing, fabulous experience.
It is. Indeed.
And one, it would it's hard to do this without doing it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd have to think about whether we want to do that. And then is when I in some previous jobs where I occasionally got to teach quality, there was sort of the students would come back like, I feel like now I'm living in a world of insanity because I'm the only one who sees this.
That's right.
It's not the happiest thing for students.
That's correct. But what I tell my students is you might have a vision of playing your guitar in Madison Square Garden someday, but they're not going to give you a contract for that concert unless you know how to play a guitar, which means you got to start wherever you are with whatever situation you got, with whatever equipment you got, and try to practice and learn it and work your way up. And so what I tell them is whatever place you are in the organization, there's plenty of this stuff to apply to your work. And if you're a supervisor, sometimes quietly with your people, yeah. And that's what you do. And you don't sit there and say, I'm going to wait till I get to the top to do this, because you won't know what to do, because you haven't had the practice. But fundamentally, if you have conventional management and you're doing something different, it's progressive compared to
I understand that.
the norm.
That makes perfect sense to me. If you start marking our program as Learn Progressive Management at CCSU, and you're not going to get very far. Bernie Sanders makes all kinds of sense in the things that he says until you learn that he's a socialist, and then much is for disciplines. That is the reality in which we live.
Yep.
Now you can say that I'm going to change the world, I'm going to do the way I want things done, and maybe 50 years from now this will be recognized. But I don't think we have that much time. So names do matter. I mean, you have to think of some way to recognize this stuff that would be recognized, of course, but not as sort of to the left, extreme socialist-oriented management.
So one of the things you could consider is that this is, I would say that this is the next step after Deming quality. TQ, by the way, wasn't, in my opinion. It was a subset, as was a whole lot of other stuff that management consultants who wanted to come up with a new name to sell products.
Right.
But if we committed to teaching these things and to practicing these things, these practices, we can rebrand that whatever, and we won't be the ones who come up with a name. It'll be the management consulting firms who have the marketing power to do that. Well, we can change the name. This is the essence of doing something that's really good.
I think the essential nugget here is that to teach management in the evolutionary fashion that is the reality of management thought and practice. And so, if you embody that thinking, you would be teaching things like management history and, what are the more successful organizations doing today in terms of, with this mindset of engaging people, doing no harm, respecting people, because, look at one of the things we all have to face, or our students have to face is, people say, well, the retirement age should be 70, 75. How are you going to survive being working in a zero-sum oriented business for a career that instead of being 30 or 40 years is now 50 or 60? It's just going to kill you. So I mean, you got to think about the human health consequences of bad leadership, bad management, the constant firefight, high levels of chronic stress, cardiovascular disease, smoking, alcoholism, gambling, suicide. These things happen. They're the real world. It's no joke. I knew a guy who killed himself at Pratt & Whitney. I had a guy reporting to me who was an alcoholic. You know, it's not all due to the workplace stress and so forth. I understand that. But it's contributory.
We want to do this, but, you know, using what framework? That's
Yeah, I'm sorry, you had it, yes.
So I'm a junior at CCSU. My fiance is in the MBA program. I found out about this, so I thought it was great. And through my journey in aerospace manufacturing, I got into aerospace NCI. Green, you know, so my mentor liked that. But then I got a little cocky, a little ego, and it killed me. So, you know, I went on the other side of the fence, became a milling operator, and started gaining some skills. And then took a step back and got back into CI. So, quickly with that said, when I found out that you guys were incorporating Lean into your MBA program, I said, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because I had actually looked at myself, what I needed as an individual to be successful. And the MBA program was the next step business-wise, because, you know, I'm not a very business-savvy kind of guy. You know, I've always believed in Lean, Kaizen, and your respect for people. So, you know, I really hope that this is accomplished. But I agree. I mean, you know, the name of it, Lean Management. I like Kaizen. You know, I like, and, you know, when you break it out, it means change is good. Yeah. You know, and so like the flavor of the month, I get it. You know, it's Lean here, Lean there. Some people think it's a joke. Some people take it seriously. But to your point, the structure itself is what's really important. So, you know, I really look forward to this. Hopefully.
To build on what he just said, it just occurred to me a title along the lines of enterprise transformation.
Well,
is more interesting.
I defer. Yeah, defer picking up with the name here because we'll be here all night. But I think another essential feature to recognize is that that generation is looking for a better work experience than what you and I tolerated in industry. We just toughed it out. You take all the shit from whoever, and then you're lucky to have a job, and that's the way it is. These guys, they say, I don't like it, I'm out of here.
Right.
And they have a hard time holding on to the younger generation because whatever company where you have poor management, they're expecting something different, but they're going to have to be part of that change to make that happen. Is that generation?
Part of the Lean management, I believe, especially with the MBA program, is not only trying to give you those skills in the business world, but also to teach you how to be a leader, you know, to be successful, how to coach, you know. And I think that's what a lot of, you know, I have buddies who have gone through CCSU, UConn, and very theoretical, you know, like you said earlier, they look at the world black and white, as opposed to consistently learning. That's what Lean really taught me. It's like, you know, master of none. I'm always learning. I'm very humble, very selfish. And that's what I love about continuous improvement. You know, you break CI into two things, Lean, Six Sigma, quality control, quality assurance, but people can never lose that respect for humanity. Because again, that is most critical.
This is what, you know, the institutions you talked about are teaching. This is your opportunity to teach this. That's much more engaging, that's much more creative, that's much more, you know, humanistic approach to business, while still being, you know, very profitable and all those great things you need to do in creating shareholder value and, you know, having a nice stock price.
I think there's two issues here that we're discussing. One is, what do we teach in the MBA? And that's the far more important one to me. And the other is, how do we use this as a marketing tool to enhance our reputation? That's also important, but much less important, I think.
But here's a hint on the marketing. You know?
You know, what I want to be teaching is teach people to see a better way. All we've heard about the last couple of months is, oh, GE is going away, the business climate in Connecticut is terrible, there's a lack of innovation, we don't have the infrastructure, everybody who just wants to cut taxes to business. You know, that's the whole message. How are we going to revitalize the state? And it's not going to be doing it by business as usual and teaching people how to survive at the GEs of the world, you know, or any other major organization that takes the approach where you're an order taker and you're a cost to be minimized as long as the CEO can get a higher bonus out of it. So if you're worried about the next flavor, you know, that Lean will be supplanted by some other thing, fine. When there's a better system out there, or there's an enhancement or an evolution of this, we should teach that. We should find the best current practice and be teaching that, whatever it is.
And this, what you'd be teaching, is mainly 30 years behind where Toyota is, or more years. So in other words, evolutionarily, you'd still be behind.
And that's why we teach other than a snapshot.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you offer a course in business history, but I mean, this is fantastically interesting stuff, gives people perspective. You know, years ago I started collecting books on industrial management from the 1800s forward to the pre-World War II period. And you wouldn't believe how much stuff, you know, we're reinventing the same thing now that these guys talked about and repeating the same mistakes and whatnot. But anyway, evolutionarily, this is, you know, what's going on.
I think it's, getting back to developing culture. So I think any product of CCSU that comes out of the MBA program, ask yourself, is that, man or woman that's coming out of this program effectively able to create a culture? It's one thing to look at, business black and white, process by process, or bad employees, et cetera, profit margins, like whatever. But do they have the tools, given to them through the program to either help a company change itself, through the ideologies of Lean and Kaizen, or again, are we creating robots, to an old management style? And, my fiance's taking this course, business course, and it's management class, and one of the questions is, what is management, art or science? I think it's a trick question, but it's, I think right now the MBA program, the traditional one, it's all about science, losing the art. But I go back to like the bad employee mentality. When I got into continuous improvement, part of the Lean, mindset taught me that, I say this all the time, that a good system will allow a bad employee to succeed. But quite the opposite, a bad system will allow a good employee or a good employee to fail.
Right.
And so
absolutely. So yeah.
So
my titanium price example, I failed.
Right.
Which is preposterous, but nevertheless, that's the bad system.
Didn't Deming say that 85% of some of the issues is the system? It's not you. And to be honest, sometimes you can separate that. But the other thing is but even if your company created a lean culture, let's say, that respects people and cares about them and sort of and even after that employee wasn't working for whatever reason, then I heard this the other day when I was doing a tour at Duraflex. The president there, Pete, said, I asked you who hired them. And I think you talked about that. Getting more strategic and smarter, hiring for excellence. And, so even further when people say, well, Lean doesn't work because even a bad employee's failing, I say, well, who hired them?
Yeah, well, I've worked in places where if you put the thermometer in their mouth and it was 98.6, you're hired. Or you hit their, stomped on their foot and they said, ouch, you're hired. So that kind of process, it's a process, a bad one, but that gets you the oftentimes bad result of people who are not capable for the work or not the right temperament for that type of work or what have you. So if you were teaching processes, if you were teaching, process view of management and engagement of the employees through Kaizen in particular, you know, what you name it, how you market it. But it's part of Connecticut business history. So you have uniqueness to tie into. Any other comments? Larry, you got any?
Any book on how to create Kaizen culture? How do you do it? In our setting, what do? We put every new professor through training.
Are you saying that? Would you do that? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, what's the matter? It's long been my view that the part of what would be considered a service contribution, you know, in our labor contract and so forth, would be participation by faculty in Kaizen, whether it's within the university or at an employer. And that would be more valuable than most of the committees we sit on. There's something like 60 committees here. There only need to be 10 or 12 tops that really define the product and so forth, and the rest of the time would be better spent in Kaizen. Getting your hands dirty, learning the kinds of tacit knowledge that you cannot learn any other way than by engaging it. And when you engage, I mean, this stuff brings tears to your eye. I mean, I remember one Kaizen in Eastern Connecticut. These guys, in a day and a half, created a flow line for their work and designed and rigged up some light equipment to be able to go do this. And you watch it, you look at it, it brought tears to your eyes to see what they did in such a short period of time once they were given guidance. I mean, it literally is an emotional thing when you see how these people were struggling to do the work 2 days ago, day and a half later, or 2 days, whatever it was. They're, it's now easy for them to go do the work. They're smiling. They're like, look what we did. And oh yeah, now the work's a lot easier. And you can now cross-train people to go do that work much more easily if somebody's out on vacation and so forth. I mean, it's just amazing.
Tom, you make a good point. I also contested that we really shouldn't pursue this unless we practice it ourselves. And we heard only a couple of days ago that we have at least one process here within the School of Business that doesn't really respond well to the voice of the customer, and that's student advisor. So you might take that as an example and make it subject to a set of Kaizen events, follow through the other processes that are laid out in the traditional horn books, and take all of that waste, all that time where forums are sitting around out of the process, just as an example. And it would be more useful than what a lot of committees do.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a good.
Larry, when we did the Kaizens at Rensselaer, we Kaizen the courses in an academic master's, an executive master's degree program years and years ago when we were at Rensselaer, Larry and I. And so some of the faculty that we had engaged in this really didn't understand, what Kaizen was. So a comment they would have afterwards was, I've been in academics for 30 years and this was the best meeting I've ever been to. They called it a meeting. But anyway, it's that kind of thing where like, oh, we actually got something done. I wasn't shut off. People listened to my ideas. We came to closure on something rapidly and accurately rather than endlessly discussing it and getting it distorted and disfigured to a point where nobody wants to talk about it anymore. This time function is very important, which people don't pay enough attention to. And that's what Kaizen does, is it gets you to an improvement quickly as opposed to